Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just start off with a couple of the slides, but just in starting, obviously this is an important piece of an integrated package of changes for us to ensure that we have sufficient capacity for housing in the short, medium and longer term. That we're making sure we have flexibility around our planning rules to ensure that we've got the types of homes that need to be built here. In the past, we've talked about, for us as a council, a significant issue about the missing middle, so I can detail that later on as well. And also very much driven by central government around the timeframes. So this is a series of actions and integrated approaches being driven out of the National Policy Statement of Urban Development. And as a Tier 2 council, we're required to meet certain timetables. So one of the important things for me is really to acknowledge Damon, Simon, Anna and Kim. We've got a very small planning policy team, and they've worked exceptionally hard and had to pull in a lot of consulting support to make sure that we're able to work in a fast pace because of the timeframes that have been set by government around this, but ensuring that at every step of the way they're trying to make sure that those conversations with the community are taking place and the research base is as solid as possible. So I'd really like to acknowledge Damon and the team who have gone above and beyond in the speed and the detail and the care they've taken in preparing these different pieces of work. So what's before you today, of course, is the future development strategy. So this is getting out of our immediate plan change requirements and starting to map out what we need to do for growth capacity over the next 30 years. So importantly, part of that, of course, is a sense that we review it every 3 years and we redo the entire future development strategy every 6 years. This replaces the spatial plan we completed in 2018 and puts a lot more solidity around the information base and the technical information. But also through that national policy statement, a critical piece here is it also makes the regional council jointly responsible for this plan. So through this agenda item, you'll see the joint committee to look at how we receive the submissions back from our community on the FDS, but also that chance to say we get an important implementation plan around that, which should inform both councils' long-term plans as they move forward. And for us, that certainly should direct us as to what our next plan changes are, what are the infrastructure investments that should be made by the Rotorua Lakes Council and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. So a really important process for us to bring those two parts together. And obviously here too, there's a very specific methodology which says about how we do those projections. One of the biggest issues we have as a community is the speed of change around planning. Planning lags behind often the changes we see from growth. And of course, the implications of that are we don't see development proceeding in the right speed. We see consequential increases in house prices and rent prices, and the pressure then going on that supply. So one of the important parts of this is to make sure we're really clear with our community about how we get a good urban form, how we do the best investment in our infrastructure, and we have that capacity to be available if it's required. So that's a really important part of it. And also give the chance for the community to see that balance between infill and greenfield development and the development of communities. So probably one of the most important pieces here is that the team have spent a lot of time over the last year working through engagement with a host of different groups and including other local authorities, iwi and hapu landowners, as well as community groups and right down to students. So a really significant amount of work. One of the challenges the team have had, of course, is that because we're working through the National Policy Statement on Urban Development Requirements. We've got a number of moving pieces. So part of the job of the team is to be really clear with the community about what's come through from the decisions around medium density residential standards, what's going to be picked up immediately in the plan change for intensification, plan change 9, and what then also gets passed through to the longer term strategic view. So all the times they're trying to make sure that the community can navigate through where that advice and that information should be going for the different processes. So that's just my introduction to this part of the item. So looking forward to the discussion and any questions we may have. I'll hand across now to Damon just to guide you through the key elements of the FDS.
Thanks, JP, and thanks for the opportunity to come and present here. I think obviously it's quite a, I mean, you will have the documents in front of you, which is the future development strategy. There's also a consultation document as well that goes out to the public, which is a leaner document to go through and gives you a good overview of the overall strategy. But just in, just to sort of set the scene, I guess, spatially, is that we could break the strategy down in terms of its what it provides in terms of residential and also what it provides in terms of business. So I think the key backdrop, as JP alluded to, was essentially the intensification plan change, which enables a lot of intensification over time, which is really that pale yellow area across the map, which covers most of the urban area. So PC9 to a degree does all the heavy lifting in terms of providing for additional homes over time. Remember, we're talking about a 30-year period out to 2053. Long-term intensification, we got to bear that in mind, that obviously being a big picture strategy towards 2030, we got to look at likely locations for longer-term intensification, and those are those brown dashed lines there showing obviously Nangatai, further south to where we've currently zoned in our current plan change, or what we propose zoning for high density around Glenholme, and then around the Tina shopping centre area, which is the Ofata, and we'll touch on the reasons why later on. Then in terms of existing greenfield locations, I think many will know Pukehangi and Wharenui Rise are our existing locations where we've got greenfield developments going on, and that obviously provides a layer of capacity. And then certainly what we'll touch on today is obviously, quite importantly, is new residential greenfield locations that will come on in different phases over time, over the short, medium and long term. So I think just for reference, when I refer to short, medium and long term in the presentation, short term is generally referred to as 3 years, medium term 10 years and long term 30 years. So I'll be using short, medium and long quite frequently, so in case there's confusion around that. And then in business, we're looking at those locations. I think you can see that pale blue circle at the top there. That's really looking at future tourism opportunities for future tourism activities along State Highway 5. And then also looking at light industrial greenfield opportunities in that purple area close to the airport and Eastgate Business Park. So that kind of gives you a sort of a snapshot or elevator pitch, I guess, in terms of what the strategy is trying to drive at. I think a key thing in terms of our approach to residential is, by and large, to try and achieve a compact city outcome. And this is in line with the NPSUD policy, ensuring that obviously we have efficient growth. And by compact city, I mean ensuring that most of our growth occurs by and large within that grey area, which is our existing urban area. But obviously looking at the yellow areas there in the map are our new greenfield locations for residential. And you'll see that they interface with the existing urban area, as well as being proximate to key state highways or corridors. And then also in terms of, sorry, just going back a slide, in terms of the mauve area, I think you can just sort of make it out along State Highway 30, which is our business locations, or also close to our existing urban area and our existing corridors. But also underpinning this is a centres-based approach, so those purple dots are essentially our centres. Centres create quite a key function in terms of supporting further residential development, so we do need to pay attention in terms of the role and function of the centres going forward, both with respect to intensification and in terms of enabling future growth in greenfield locations. So quickly, underpinning that is, I guess, the hierarchy of centres and making sure that we have a good functioning hierarchy. So the big purple dot in the middle is our city centre, and that effectively is the centre that is really the hub of our retail, office and cultural activities, and we want to ensure that we support that through the actions that we put in place. And then, quite importantly, are our other major centres. So we've got Nongatai and that location around Owhata, which is around the Tina Centre, becoming quite important in the future because of the yellow areas that we've identified for future residential development. So those are key centres going forward and providing support for that growth. And then obviously a number of secondary and tertiary centres, which are those smaller mauve circles, which are quite important in terms of supporting intensification going forward. I think lastly, just to mention, our corridors also play an important role. For example, Fenton Street has been enabled for greater heights through the plan change, and we want to obviously support that greater residential development with improvements to the corridor over time. So there's a quick rendered images below showing Fenton Street now and Fenton Street later. Obviously, what you see there is improvements with respect to enabling greater, I suppose, modes of transport, and particularly active modes of transport to get people moving in different manners across that centre and making it more active across that corridor. Just broadly in terms of our approach to business, I've mentioned the network of centres being quite important, and that's particularly in terms of delivering the services that we need. So in terms of business services, centres play a key role. I think a key part of the strategy was also identifying alternative locations for the relocation of industrial activities that are less compatible with existing areas. So we've got residential areas that have surrounded areas of or legacy industrial areas. So those red arrows show where we would like to, I suppose, incentivize the relocation of business. So away from, for instance, Napuna, which is kind of shown on the southeast, and also away from Fairy Springs, kind of in the middle of the image there, in the western side of the picture, to the west of State Highway 5. And then, quite importantly, Nongatai as well. And this has an important, with respect to Nongatai, it has important regenerative function, because I suppose currently you've got these awkwardly located car yards and industrial activities right in the centre. And ideally what we want to do is try and incentivise the relocation of that to the south of Nongatai. So that centre becomes more of a mixed-use residential commercial centre. And then obviously ensuring that we've got an efficient regional transport connection along State Highway 30, which is signalled by that dark purple arrow. And it's quite important that that continues to function as a key corridor for moving, I suppose, key freight from the south, from businesses in the south, where you see Pekka Block, right in the south of the picture, through to the port, which is in the northeast. And overwhelmingly business supported location on that corridor in order to, I suppose, fit into their growth picture. That red dotted circle on State Highway 30 on the, I suppose, on the right-hand side of the picture, right at the top, also is an indication where we've signalled the greenfield growth for light industrial activity, which is close to the airport, but also just south of the Eastgate Business Park, and it makes sense that we expand the business opportunities in that location for the reasons I mentioned. I think with respect to the tourism sector, which is quite important, we flagged, I think you could just make out the yellow hashed sort of areas to the south of Nongatai. It's the key northern gateway, I guess, to Rotorua, so it's important that we provide future land for tourism activities, which is that peachy area in that circle to the south of Nongatai, and then also to our southern gateway along State Highway 5, going past the Pekka Block into Fenton Street, or into Fenton Street being quite important in terms of improving the quality and amenity of Fenton Street for tourism activities over time. I think another key factor of a future development strategy is signalling that you've got sufficient capacity to cater for growth. And I think quite importantly, we you know, we've got an evidence base that supports that we need to provide for about 10,000 homes by 2053. But what we have provided for is 12,300 homes by 2053 through the strategy. And it's important to flag that we've done that because of specific market and uncertainties in terms of realizing intensification over a 30-year period. Generally, intensification takes a lot longer to come on stream, but also because of delivery uncertainties around some of our greenfield locations due to kind of limited landowner and developers involved in those opportunities. But also to bear in mind that a strategy is flexible, and that a large part of, I suppose, what at least 50% of that greenfield land that we've identified, we've signaled to come on stream in the latter part of the strategy, which is around 2030. But we've got the flexibility of bringing it forward if we're not seeing intensification take place. So just quickly, in terms of how we split this 12,300 homes, 7,000 homes, about 57% would be delivered within our existing urban footprint, which is our existing urban area, and this is where the intensification plan change obviously enables a significant portion of that. The rest of that, which is 43%, is greenfield, noting that our existing greenfield takes up 14% of that, and that existing greenfield is Pukehangi and Wharenui Rise. So that's our split in terms of capacity. But it's also important to note, how is it capacity distributed? And we're talking about new homes when we talk about capacity, but how is it distributed across our city? So we're looking at just over 3,000 homes in Nangatai, which is about 26% of the capacity. A further 36% in Westside, 4,450 homes. 1,350 homes in the central area, and then 3,350 homes out in East Side. So this just really shows you a spread. Don't take too much away from the numbers there, because obviously each of those areas are spatially different. So I think just in terms of quickly zooming down now into each of those spatial localities, which gives you a clearer sense of what the strategy is trying to achieve. I'm going to sort of just step you through quickly each of those areas. So in terms of Nangatai, if we look at the short to medium term, which is 3 to 10 years, we're looking at enabling, I suppose, significant residential development north of Stembridge Road, which is that green circle, the first green circle from the bottom up, and then in and around Break Road, and also around Nangatai Road as well, which is those green circles. So that's our short-term residential provision, which allows for a more competitive greenfield market when this comes on stream. In the medium term, we're looking at a locality south of Delbeth Road, medium term being sort of 10 to 30-year picture, and in the long term, which is south of Leonard Road, a key location there for bringing on residential. And obviously this will be monitored over time in terms of when we bring those, whether we bring some of those developed locations forward or back, depending on where we're seeing intensification. But in terms of intensification for Nangatai, it's important that we signal intensification in and around that mauve dot in the middle, which is the town centre. And we incentivize, as I mentioned, the relocation of industrial out of that centre, which is that orange area, to the south of Nangatai. In terms of business, just leading on from what I was saying earlier, we've therefore identified a location at the nexus of State Highway 36 and State Highway 5 as greenfield business opportunity, and hopefully that will incentivize the relocation of business or industrial activity, if you like, that's sitting awkwardly in the current town centre of Nangatai. And in the longer term, we're looking at, as I mentioned earlier, Nangatai being a key gateway, looking at providing for, I guess, tourist/commercial activity to the south of State Highway 5. East Side, which is another key growth location. In the short, medium term, we've identified residential development, greenfield residential development around Rotorua Lakefront. But it's important to mention the fact that obviously we're seeing delivery of, I suppose, our existing greenfield location in Wharenui Rise, which I think is around 1,000 homes when it's fully built out. So that's the short-term picture. In the long term, we've identified further greenfield land, which is north of Wharenui Road and south of G Road, as a key location for future residential development. And in terms of long-term intensification, obviously the shopping area around the sort of Tina Centre becomes quite important for enabling further intensification, noting that it's not only to provide, I suppose, as a key hub for future residential development, but also for future business development around the airport and further north of that. So that leads on to the business picture, where we've identified in that blue circle there, I suppose, that future business land south of Eastgate Business Park and also adjacent to the airport, and then the long-term business land to the west of State Highway 30, leading through to State Highway 33 and obviously accessing the port along State Highway 30. Central's obviously very important in terms of ensuring that our centre enables obviously the intensification that we would like to see in terms of apartments and terraced homes. So the starting point is really what's been proposed for the plan change, which is that high density residential area, our proposed residential 2 area reflected in orange there. And that enables heights up to 19.5 metres. So obviously, hopefully, we'll get apartments and terraced housing over time in that location. But also identified, remember, it's a 20-50-year view, so a 30-year picture, identified naturally future intensification occurring around the Glenholme area, obviously leveraging off Old Taupo Road and Malfroy as a future centre, and then also potentially the race course if it did have to come on stream in the future as a residential area. Obviously, a lot of processes before that ever happened. Then in terms of corridors, I think for the central area, corridors are critical because this is where we expect to see our high density. So to Tanaka Street, that certainly see upgrades in terms of signalling greater pedestrianisation, leveraging of East Street, ensuring we have a strong connection from the lakefront to the central mall. Fenton Street I've mentioned as well. Obviously, we obviously signalling greater residential development along Fenton Street, so that's quite important that we see the relevant upgrades. And then Old Taupo Road is that key connection from the north all the way to Nangatai and then down to the south. So when we see residential development over time, in that we need to obviously see greater, I suppose, upgrades in relation to that road. And then certainly that central corridor connecting the east to the west is also quite important in terms of upgrading, and that's already been, I think, signalled in Waka Kotani's plans, so it's important that that's realised over time. I think quite critically, won't spend a lot of time on this, but alongside this is making sure that we expand our existing transport and both from a public transport and active transport perspective networks. So that's your cycling, pedestrian and bus routes, and obviously having greater frequencies. So the red dashed lines are sort of a schematic reflection of the transport routes, and the mauve dashed lines are the cycling network. So very quickly, just in terms of west side, quite importantly, starting with the short-term greenfield or short to medium-term greenfield residential perspective, we've identified land towards Aquarius Drive, Heritage Farm area, right to the top of your picture in that yellow, sort of solid yellow colour. But critically across west side, it's really ensuring that medium density residential development takes place, which is really that mustard yellow throughout the image. Quite critically, we're expecting, I suppose, through the plan change to see delivery of more duplexes and walk-ups across that broad area. But that does rely, I suppose, quite critically on our bus and transport networks. So just in terms of business, I think a key thing to mention in that blue circle is that what we do want to do is incentivise the relocation of some of the awkwardly located industrial activities that are happening there, like and that sort of where I've got that blue circle. So the broader industrial picture of identifying land elsewhere, both in the Peka block, but also potentially along State Highway 30, would hopefully incentivise the movement of those activities away. So also investment in corridors. So we've mentioned the old Taupo Road, which is State Highway 5, is important, but also in terms of the western picture, Pukehangi Road becomes very important. We know that we've got the Pukehangi development, which is looking at about 750 new homes. So upgrading that road with respect to cycling and transport is critical. And there's an opportunity of joining up the existing bus networks which are identified in the red dotted lines if we upgrade Pukehangi Road. So really that's kind of a whirlwind tour, I guess, of I suppose the FDS strategy. Quite a lot to cover in a short space of time. I think, as JP mentioned, a critical component to this will be the implementation of it. So what we envisaged in terms of those 4 spatial areas is to have priority development plans that would help us implement those actions, and that would form the basis of an implementation plan for the FDS, which would be reviewed on an annual basis as an active, I suppose, roadmap for delivery. But then the FDS itself gets updated every 3 years and a new one developed every 6 years. Then just in terms of process going forward, as a wrap-up, in terms of engagement, prior to public engagement, we're having 4 hui with Mana Whenua at the moment, and that's to take the FDS to our key partners before it actually goes to the public. And those 4 areas are kind of more or less spatially configured in relation to those areas I took you through. The other key thing will be obviously today's approval of the FDS and the consultation document that goes out to the public. And then following this will be our public process, which is an LGA process. And we've given it 6 weeks. We required 4 weeks, but we've given an extra 2 weeks to engage the public. So it's from the 1st of June to the 14th of July. And then we sort of envisaged, after getting all the submissions, to have our hearings and deliberations in the last week of August, and then hopefully looking at September, October for the actual adoption of the FDS itself.
Councillors, probably just picking up on another piece which is really important for the community and to understand is obviously this has been built off the housing and business capacity assessment that was undertaken. I think it was adopted about a year ago now, and so that has a fairly robust process around looking at how we envisage those projections and population changes. So really that becomes the underpinning projections that sit behind the requirements for the amount of capacity we need. Of course, the minute you start looking into the future, things can change and change quite rapidly, whether it's globally, nationally, or even locally if people make decisions about not developing or certain blocks of land aren't available to develop. So one of the most important things for us going forward is as we move towards those 3 yearly reviews and the 6 yearly rewrites is to make sure we have that monitoring in place. So we need to understand what homes are being built, where, what types of homes, and that's really important for us to understand when we talk with our infrastructure colleagues about where they need to prioritise infrastructure upgrades or where development contribution investment needs to go to ensure that the infrastructure is there in place for development that occurs, but equally to talk to government and to review ourselves about are we getting the outcomes we expected or have things changed. So really that gives us the opportunity at a more regular basis to say, look, if we're not achieving certain outcomes like levels of infill, do we need to bring on some of the greenfield developments sooner? So again, that's some of the adaptive approach we will have to take as we move forward on that 3 yearly, 6 yearly cycle. So I think at this stage, we're happy to answer if any questions.
Thank you, Damon, for that very comprehensive presentation. I think there's probably going to be quite a number of questions out of this. This is a comprehensive piece of work. It's very technical. It's been going on for a long period of time.